Sarah, the Russian military has come out and said that there was no poison gas attack. That was Sergei Lavrov the other day. Said they've got no evidence of it. Today, a Russian military official says, oh, there was an attack, but it was staged by the White Helmets Brigade, component of the rebels in Syria. What do you say to the Russian statement that this thing was staged by the White Helmets?
The intelligence provided certainly paints a different picture, and the president holds Syria and Russia responsible for this chemical weapons attack.
We are studying that situation extremely closely. We are meeting with our military and everybody else, and we'll be making some major decisions over the next 24 to 48 hours. We are very concerned when a thing like that can happen. This is about humanity. We're talking about humanity.
Significantly, he suggested President Putin may bear responsibility and said every nation enabling the attack is going to pay a price.
If it's Russia, if it's Syria, if it's Iran, if it's all of them together, we'll figure it out, and we'll know the answers quite soon.
It has also prompted an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, where the US, Britain and France expressed outrage, and the Russians suggested it was the rebels who had staged the attack to trigger an American intervention.
Everything you touch, chaos is left behind.
Moscow's ambassador assailed Western rhetoric, making clear this is a crisis that could quickly escalate far beyond the Syrian battlefield.
Russia is being unpardonably threatened. The tone with which this is being done has gone beyond the threshold of what is acceptable, even during the Cold War. Such boorishness against my country is something which your predecessors did not take the liberty to undertake.
Who does this?
In response, the US ambassador blamed Moscow.
The Russian regime, whose hands are all covered in the blood of Syrian children, cannot be ashamed by pictures of its victims. We've tried that before. We must not overlook Russia and Iran's roles in enabling the Assad regime's murderous destruction. We are on the edge of a dangerous precipice. History will record this as the moment when the Security Council either discharged its duty or demonstrated its utter and complete failure to protect the people of Syria. Either way, the United States will respond.
The high risk for the Americans is launching a strike that provokes a military reaction from Russia. It has significant air power in Syria, and after 7 years, it is still entirely possible that the superpowers may collide here head-on.
Russia says an alleged chemical attack in the Syrian city of Douma has been staged. That came as part of a speech by the country's representative, Vasily Nebenzia, before the UN Security Council.
Following the liberation of Douma from rebel fighters, Russian specialists were sent there, specialists in radiological, chemical, and biological protection, to collect evidence and information. They took soil samples which show the lack of nerve agent and chlorine-containing substances. In interviews, not a single local resident confirmed the chemical attack having taken place. Bodies of people killed by chemical agents have not been found, and medical personnel and residents have no information about their potential burial areas. Therefore, the use of sarin and chlorine has not been confirmed.
And RT's Caleb Morpin has the details of the meeting.
As the 15-member body convened and we had a meeting of the UN Security Council, we heard first from the representative of the Russian Federation. Now, when Nebenzia spoke, he just kind of broke down how the facts just aren't there about this alleged chemical attack in Douma. He talked about how traces of the chemical, they just didn't seem to be there. Furthermore, they could not find a single civilian eyewitness to confirm that the attack happened. They could not find victims in nearby hospitals or any graves or sites of bodies. It just didn't add up. Now, from there, he went on to talk about the fact that anti-government fighters, terrorist groups like al-Nusra and others, there have been occasions in which territory has been liberated from them, and it's been discovered that they are stockpiling chemical weapons and that they have in the past used chemical weapons against the positions of the Syrian government.
You heard the warnings, but you consciously ignored them because they didn't correspond to the doctrinal arrangements of those who sleep and dream about the liquidation of the official government in one more Arab country.
Now, the Russian representative said that Russia would favor the creation of a new independent body to investigate allegations about chemical weapons and their use in Syria. Now, the United Kingdom spoke up in agreement with Russia's call, and furthermore, when the Syrian Arab Republic took the floor, they also spoke up and said that they would favor the creation of an independent body to investigate the use of chemical weapons in Syria. From there, we heard from Nikki Haley, the representative of the United States. She went on to blame the Syrian government for the attack, despite the fact that very little investigation has taken place. She blamed the Syrian government for the attack, and from there she said that the United States intends to respond to this alleged chemical attack, regardless of whether the UN Security Council approves of that or not. She says that the USA intends to take action. Now, her remarks come after Donald Trump said the USA was in the process of making some big decisions regarding the chemical attack in Duma. This is Donald Trump speaking prior to the UN Security Council meeting.
We are studying that situation extremely closely. We are meeting with our military and everybody else, and we'll be making some major decisions over the next 24 to 48 hours.
U.S. military action, is it off the table as it relates?
Nothing's off the table. Nothing's off the table.
In the meeting, we did hear from the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, Bashar Jafari, and when he began speaking and dissecting the allegations made against his country, at that point, the U.S. delegation walked out, making a point that they did not acknowledge or respect the Syrian Arab Republic.
And how about this to think about today? The crisis in Syria may be more than just a current foreign policy problem, with some seeing signs of biblical prophecies of the apocalypse in the events that are unfolding overseas. Passages in the Old Testament even make reference to Damascus falling into ruin, sparking worldwide conflict that some say leads to the coming of the Messiah. Joel Rosenberg is a former aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and he is a Middle East analyst and has written several books on this issue. Joel, welcome. Good to have you with us today.
Good to be with you, Martha.
You know, I think it's very interesting to look at this from that historic biblical perspective, because in many ways, obviously, you know, what you have here is a clash of civilizations in a larger sense, and of Christianity and of radical Islam, and this desire for a caliphate on the part of radical Islamists in that part of the world. So explain to us, take us through Isaiah and what your thinking is on what the Bible says about this.
Well, Martha, it is fascinating. We don't know for certain that the current events are definitely going to play out to be the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but the implosion of Syria definitely has people interested. Isaiah 17 and its parallel passage in Jeremiah 49 both describe the absolute destruction, the catastrophic destruction of Damascus at some point in the eschatological future, the end times. Isaiah 17 verse 1 says, Damascus will be removed from being a city. One translation says it will cease to be a city. Now, Damascus has been attacked, it's been conquered throughout history, but it's never been removed as a city. It's one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on the face of the earth, first mentioned in the Bible in Genesis, and now we're still talking about it today.
Yeah, you know, and it's very interesting when you look at these passages, but as you say, Damascus and the Middle East have been, you know, under duress, to put it mildly, over you know, the past several decades. So, I mean, why would this be, you know, that moment? And in biblical terms, we see so many things happen in the Bible that, you know, happen over the course of centuries, of thousands of years in biblical terms.
Well, Martha, what's interesting about this one is that you're right. We don't know for certain that we're in some time frame where these Bible prophecies will come true. But other Bible prophecies have come true, like the rebirth of the state of Israel in our own lifetime. And so those are major end times prophecies, Jews coming back to the Holy Land. One thing that's interesting about Jeremiah 49 is that it says people will be fleeing from the city of Damascus when this happens. And, of course, we've seen 2 million Syrians flee the country of Syria in the last 30 months. 5 million Syrians have been internally displaced. They're fleeing from Damascus, from other towns and villages. They haven't left the country yet, but they're definitely fleeing. And the fear is that as we watch the implosion of the entire country of Syria, which is tragic, it's horrible, but is it possible that a judgment of Damascus for its evil is coming that would lead to the total fulfillment of those prophecies and the destruction of Damascus. We need to be praying, of course, for the people of that city as they go through such tragedy, but it is possible because those prophecies have not yet been fulfilled. And I wrote a book called Damascus Countdown. It's a New York Times bestseller. It's out right now. It's about how it could happen, but of course we don't know for sure that it will happen. But it's a tragedy either way in what's happening in Damascus right now.
You also see some parallels about what's said in the Bible about Egypt.
Well, that's true. Isaiah 19, just a few chapters later, indicates a terrible civil war, the rise of a fierce king, economic
Who's the fierce king?
problem. Well, you know, that's a good question. A few weeks ago, when some people speculated maybe it was Morsi. This is what the problem, or the challenge, let's say, with Bible prophecy. You want to study what the text says, and you want to understand it in its historical, grammatical context. And you can certainly look at the current events, but you do have to be careful not to overreach or to sensationalize the text, you know, doing what people call newspaper exegesis, trying to say that the newspaper proves the Bible. No. The Bible stands on its own, and for many centuries, people didn't think Israel would be reborn as a country and Jews would come back to the Holy Land. They thought that was, you know, symbolic. But it's happened now, and now that those series of end times prophecies have happened, it does cause people, even skeptics, to say, maybe the other things the Bible say will happen in the future will happen possibly even on our lifetime.
Hi everyone, this is Syrian.
That's interesting.
Syria has been attacked by the US-Israeli-French alliance. Missiles struck the T4 military base, a base that is crucial to the fight against ISIS. This comes right after a false flag chemical attack in the suburb of Douma in Ghouta, Damascus. The neocons are blaming the Syrian government for the chemical attack, but once again there is no motive because Assad was winning. After 7 years of war, Ghouta is almost completely liberated from Al-Qaeda-linked rebels. Thousands of civilians have evacuated the city. For years, the rebels weren't allowing them to leave because they were using them as human shields. Most rebel groups in Ghouta surrendered, but one rebel group called the Army of Islam, which controls Douma, refused. This is because they believed that they had leverage in the form of civilian hostages that they kidnapped from a nearby pro-Assad Alawite town called Adra.
They were taken by Sunni rebels last August.
تم أسر هذه النساء والأطفال والآن كما ترون أنتم أمنين نحن مكان جيد.
The Army of Islam, one of the groups the US listed as moderate, kidnapped men, women and children. They put them in cages and paraded them around the city of Douma, saying that if Assad bombs the rebels, the hostages would die. They were literally using them as human shields. A few weeks ago, they released footage of these hostages walking through an underground tunnel in Douma, injured and distressed.
نحن كنا بسجن اكتوبر، بعدين طلعونا على أمن وحطونا بدوما، بس إنه مش الحال ومستحيل يضربوا الأسرى.
Since these civilians were from a pro-Assad Alawite town, the rebels thought that they had more value as human shields than the civilians of Douma. But the war continued, and it looked like the Army of Islam were about to surrender. But suddenly they stalled negotiations and rained hundreds of missiles down on Damascus city center. You see, some of their members didn't want to surrender. This was when the false flag chemical attack happened. It's obvious the people, the children that were killed in the gas attack were the hostages that the rebels had kidnapped. Footage of 4 children suffocated in an underground bunker emerged. A wood-burning oven right behind them was producing carbon monoxide. The rebels also released footage of perfectly healthy kids being drugged and hosed down. Some of the hostages have been rescued. Among them is Judy. She was abducted 4 years ago when she was only 8 months old. How many children just like her didn't make it and were gassed by the rebels in a false flag attack? And just look at the timing. A week prior to this attack, Trump said he would pull troops out of Syria. Now he's saying he's going to attack Assad. It's the exact repeat of last year's scenario. The chemical attack that occurred in Idlib on the 4th of April in 2017 occurred almost a year to the day of this attack. And a week prior to that attack, the US said regime change was no longer the objective in Syria. And afterwards, Trump attacked Syria. Also, a day prior to the chemical attack, Israeli President Netanyahu called Trump and told him that he wasn't allowed to pull out of Syria. It's obvious who benefits. It's not the US soldiers that recently died in North Syria. This chemical attack is the excuse that Israel and the neocons need to keep the US troops in Syria indefinitely and have a casus belli for World War III.